everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Lots to talk about again today. Governor Walker will be signing a state budget soon. We'll talk about what's in it, what's not, and how it will affect his race for the presidency. We'll talk about the incredible number of homicides in the city of Milwaukee and what, if anything, can be done about it. And, of course, we'll talk about Bill Cosby and all the accusations that he drugged women before he had sex with them. First, let me introduce everybody. You know Kevin Fischer, who spent many years here as a broadcast journalist. Avi Lenk, longtime newspaper business reporter and co-author of the recently published book, The Man Who Painted the Universe. And, of course, Gerard Randall, education and job creation consultant. Rick Horowitz is going to be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, let's talk first about the state budget that was finally approved by lawmakers, holds the line on income and property taxes, continues the freeze on University of Wisconsin tuition, does away with most of the prevailing wage laws, but critics say it's a horrible budget for education at all levels, from kindergarten through college. Kevin, anticipated criticism?
Well, there always is, and let's be honest, this was a difficult budget for the Republicans to put together. There was fumbling, stumbling, bumbling, blunders, but I have been in politics, either covering it or involved in politics long enough to know that even though process is important to folks, far more important is the final product, the results. What did you do? And when the dust clears and the governor signs this budget, it's a pretty responsible document. It doesn't raise property taxes. It doesn't raise income taxes. It does not raise sales taxes. So the taxpayers is taken care of. It starts to reform the antiquated system of prevailing wage, where the state will save hundreds of millions of dollars each year. Education fully funds K-12 in the first in the budget in the first year of the biennium. In the second year, we add $100 per pupil. Also in this budget, we fully protect important programs for our most vulnerable: senior care, family care, the Wisconsin retirement system. All in all, I think the governor will get most of what he wants. He's got the most powerful veto pen in the world. How he will use it, I don't know. Maybe to save more money, or maybe to shrink government even more so. But even though you had all these problems and Republicans uncharacteristically fighting with one another and violating the commandment that was handed down by Ronald Reagan many, many years ago, the final document is very, very responsible. I think the governor will look good in his presidential run. It will not be a hindrance to him.
So, Avi, the open records thing blew up in their face. They took that out. The Milwaukee Bucks arena, they couldn't come to an agreement. They took that out. Do you expect when he does use his veto pen, will there be any big surprises or not?
I have no idea, but I would like to agree with something that Kevin said, which is that this budget will work very well for the governor running for president. It works very poorly, horribly, rottenly for the people of Wisconsin. It cuts the university. It attacks the fundamentals of the university with tenure. It increases the fees for people to use state parks. It requires people on public assistance to be drug tested. And it has two completely idiotic and insane proposals in it that are designed, as far as I can see, only to make the lives of working people worse. It allows payday loan companies, which, please don't get me going on payday loan companies. At one point in my career, I counseled people who were badly enthralled to them, to sell annuities and insurance and all kinds of financial products which probably are not necessary for these people, but can be foisted upon them as conditions for loans. It's horrible.
That might be coming out.
Well, you know, but and then it also talks about allowing people to work 7 days a week if they sign a voluntary paper saying they will. I would think that our governor, who is a Christian and who makes no bones about a Christian and following Christian values, might want to think about the Ten Commandments, one of which is remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And I don't want anybody to think that I think the government should be run along religious lines. But our governor has said this is one of the ways he wants to conduct his life. How in the world he can possibly agree to something that would allow people to voluntarily sign away the
employers are, let's be honest with the people that are watching here. Employers are not going to be able to force people to work 7 days.
Kevin, I didn't interrupt you. Please don't interrupt me.
Well, let's be factual here.
I said voluntary. But your employer puts a piece of paper in front of you and says, I want you to sign this. There's a bit of compulsion there, especially if you don't have a union. And that's another thing this this budget does. It incredibly tries to diminish the power of unions. In the long run, this may be in the short run a very good document to help the governor win the Iowa caucuses. In the long run, and even in the medium term, it's very, very bad for the future of this state.
Well, tell that to people who pay high property taxes.
Tell that to people whose jobs depend and future prosperity depends upon the kind of vigor, intellectual and economic, that the University of Wisconsin brings to this state.
Now, Gerard, you were on the UW Board of Regents for a long time. Is this budget as bad as the Board of Regents complains and as bad as the UW administration seems to imply that it is?
Overall, it's not as bad if they pool resources and they work together to eliminate some of the areas where there's duplication. Where they could come together and combine certain back office processes. So I think there's some savings that they'll achieve. They're being forced to achieve those savings where in the past they may not have considered them or certainly wouldn't have implemented them. I think overall with this budget, you've got the fiscal aspect, which I agree with Kevin on. Then you've got the policy aspect. And where we've gone further down the road with this budget, where in the past we may not have made as many policy changes through this process, through the Joint Finance Committee process, as we've done in this, with this cycle. There are far too many policy issues that didn't have the opportunity for public vetting that were included in the budget.
I mentioned two of them. You
did, and I'll mention a third. I think the piece where the Joint Finance Committee determined that failing schools in the Milwaukee public schools should be turned over to a commissioner that's appointed by the county executive.
Not the mayor, which would make more sense.
To me, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, if you're going to do anybody, it would make more sense to be the mayor who's the city rather than the county executive.
And I think they would have agreed on that, but the bottom line is there was no vetting of any of that. And so if you don't have public discussion, if you just run things through because you've got the votes on a committee to do it, that's bad public policy in the long haul. And there are too many questions that are left about how these policies will work, which, had they the benefit of vetting, would have made for better policy in the long run.
Yeah, non-fiscal items, policy items have no business being in the budget. But when Jim Doyle was governor, there were dozens and dozens.
That's an old discussion, but there are
no, he brought it up. It's a real discussion. There are too many policy items in that budget, and if the governor's going to use his veto pen, that's where the ink should go.
Right.
There's two things that aren't in this budget that maybe deserve some discussion. One of them is the Bucks Arena is not in the budget. I don't know how you folks feel about that. I think that makes the odds a little bit longer that they're actually...
Well, Milwaukee Democrats have to
that they're actually going to get it
through the table and show some support.
The other thing is this budget still refuses to take all the money that the federal government would like to give us to expand health care for the poorest among us. And that money would have gone a long way to easing the fiscal burdens that the governor's tax cuts imposed upon this budget a long time ago.
The burden.
And they aren't in there. They aren't in there.
No, that last one, though, the health care piece would extend the burden to future generations because there clearly is no ability on the part of our current state government to pay for those long-term
the federal government is going to pay for almost all of that. We're not talking about state government.
The federal government is not going to pay for all of it. That's the point. It's a Medicaid is a shared responsibility fiscally.
Right.
And so why should the state expand a service it can't afford?
Because for every $1 it spends, it gets 9 back from the federal government.
All right, next topic.
Free money.
Next topic.
Right.
There's a shocking level of killing taking place on the streets of Milwaukee so far this year. 84 dead. 2 more murders and will match the total number of homicides for all of last year. And it's only July. Do you blame the mayor? Do you blame the police chief? Do you blame guns? Or do you simply blame the criminals who are pulling the triggers? Kevin, you say all the time, we need more cops, we need more cops. Is that really the answer?
That's not the complete solution. You could have a beat cop on every street in the city of Milwaukee, you'd still have high crime. I think the solution is, the problem is the behavior, all right? It is the criminal. And you cannot, and police officers have told me this, they are extremely frustrated because, to a person, they do their job. They apprehend the bad guys, they arrest them, they lock them up, and you have a revolving criminal justice system that puts them back on the street, and these criminals know that. They know they're going to be back out, so there's no incentive for them to obey laws, and they just recommit. So you're going to have a situation where the district attorney and the far majority of the judges in Milwaukee County are just going to have to get tough and, okay, these are the people that the police have arrested, they're before us, and do not impose sentences that are merely slaps on the wrist. It would be great, too, if the economy was better and there would be more jobs. I think if people have more jobs, they're less apt to commit crimes. They're more likely to have their own home that they will take care of, and they will pay taxes, and they will not engage in criminal activity. Yeah, that's part of the solution. And to go to school and stay in school and graduate. It would also be helpful if the family structure was stronger than it is today. But to blame a lack of gun laws and Republicans in Madison, that's a cop-out. You're the police chief, you're the mayor in this town, it's happening in your town, you have to accept responsibility.
Would it be better for our community if instead of spending $500 million to build a new arena, we built a new prison or had more judges or had more teachers?
Well, I want to say a couple of things to Kevin. First of all, if you want to lock people up longer, how are you going to pay for it? This budget that we just talked about actually cuts money for some prison guards at night. Just think about that.
Can I answer you?
Yes.
You actually save money by locking people up longer because they're not out committing crimes and.
But you have to.
And then they're not victimizing people.
But
fewer people are going to the hospital.
Kevin, all of that may be true, but you have
It is true.
But you have to raise taxes to find the money to do it to save the money. I just asked you that question. Let me keep going, please.
I think people would pay for public safety. They really would.
It needs to be harder to get a gun in Milwaukee. I'm not saying that laws will stop people from doing something that they want to do, but it should be made harder to do it. And the governor's just made it easier by getting rid of the 48-hour waiting period, which we see from reports down in South Carolina the FBI wasn't enforcing very well anyway. So that needs to be done. You're right about the economy and jobs. I would point out that this Republican governor, I'm not supposed to blame for anything, closed down a very well-paying manufacturing plant that was going in on the north side of Milwaukee to build railroad cars as almost his first thing that he did when he came into office. And there are now hundreds of middle-class jobs down in Rochelle, Illinois, that would have been on the north side of Milwaukee, providing the kind of jobs you say are necessary as part of this. You also have a government in Madison that is cutting back on resources that are allowable here in Milwaukee. Of course, the person who's responsible for all of these deaths is the person who pulled the trigger. I would never argue against that. But you can do a lot as a society to make it less likely they're going to do it. And we aren't doing the things
Giving
where...
baseball cards, holding seminars, roundtable discussions.
Finding jobs, making it harder to get guns, and actually showing a little bit more respect for the community in which this is mostly happening. An awful lot of the things that happen in Madison, and I could go through and probably list several of them in the budget that just happened, are all, it's not going to help the governor win the Iowa caucuses to make life in the central city of Milwaukee any better.
If handguns were outlawed, would most of these 84 people still be alive?
No.
Some of them would be.
No.
Some of them would be.
Bans don't work. Washington, D.C. is a perfect example.
The most recent deaths that were kids, 13, 15 years old, these are the kinds of horrid stories that I never thought I would see repeated on a daily basis in this community. And for me, it frankly goes back to, especially with these younger folk, it goes back to parenting and being able to manage the lives of your children better than they're being managed now. even if you were exercising better monitoring of Facebook pages, communications over social media that young people are more prone to, some of the more hot-headed attitudes that they have, being out past curfew. Some of these kids, for the life of me, I don't understand why you got 11, 12-year-old kids that are out past 10 o'clock at night.
Because they're watching fireworks.
During school years. Well, during school days. It's every day we don't have a fireworks display. And these are and they're not with their parents either.
Correct.
So these are the kinds of things that government can't fix it. Government hasn't been responsible for the breakage in large part. I think it's personal responsibility, parental responsibility, and people don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that they have to take some ownership for their own behavior, for the ownership of the behavior of the children that they bring into the world. And unfortunately, as long as that's not properly addressed, we're going to see this continued violence occur. The other thing that I think this police chief and the mayor have failed to acknowledge, there's gang wars there are gang wars that are going on in this community that we haven't been able to tamp down. And so much of what has happened around this youth violence especially then leads to retaliation. And that retaliation is something that is perpetual as long as we don't get to the root of it, which is a lot of these adult gangbangers who are involved in drug trade using young people to stimulate their activity. And that, to me, is the root of what we're experiencing now.
All right, next topic. Comedian Bill Cosby's reputation took another hit this week when a decade-old sealed court deposition was unsealed, where Cosby admitted getting quaaludes to give to women so he could have sex with them. The dozens of allegations against Cosby go back decades, but he's never been found guilty of any crime. Is there still a case here where we say innocent until proven guilty?
Well, you have to say that for everybody, but the circumstantial evidence here, and actually the words out of Cosby's own mouth, and I don't mean Noah, I don't mean God, Noah talking to God, I mean very, very important.
You're talking about one of his record albums.
Yes, but very, very important words would seem to convict him of these horrible crimes. You know, the question I guess we're left with is, what happens now? Hopefully the victims can find some vindication in this, and I assume that there are, if not criminal, certainly civil procedures that are left that they can pursue. As for Cosby's reputation, he doesn't have any. You know, it's interesting, Gerard was talking about the necessity of families being, and that was one of the things Mr. Cosby said. You know, so partially what you've got here is that nothing's ever completely black or completely white. There's good and bad in everybody. And this is certainly an example of that. You can't gainsay some of the very good things he's done, the people he's entertained. You know, all kinds of entertainers have all kinds of horrible secrets. All kinds of politicians have horrible secrets. All kinds of journalists and everybody else have horrible secrets. And I suppose it's an individual judgment as to how much stress you want to put on the good and the bad. I find it very, very difficult to give him any credit for anything that he's done in the past because his personal behavior was so atrocious.
If these accusations are all true, what does that say about our society, that it was allowed to go on for so long?
That's what's troubling. I'm sorry.
He was still putting concerts on earlier this year.
Don't forget these accusations started way back in 2000. You've had more than 25 women have come forward and with hauntingly similar stories, disgusting stories, but nobody gave them credence. It took a male comedian to call out Bill Cosby as a rapist during his stand-up routine before anybody started taking this seriously. And what does that say to us as a society? Because he was on TV, because he was a good guy, because he's an entertainer, because he's a pillar of society, we thought, because he has all these morals and virtues, he couldn't possibly have done this. Now, I won't go so far as the feminist movement and say, well, anytime someone is accused of rape, you have to believe them. No, that's ridiculous, because there are false accusations. But
these have gone pretty far beyond that.
We have just, I mean, poll after poll, people had very difficulty coming to grips that he could have done this.
Right.
And that exacerbates the rape culture that we have in this country.
Did we look at him as Dr. Huxtable instead of a guy?
We did. We looked at him because of the prominence that he had in the media, and he was in many ways a creation of the media also. This Mr. Clean Jeans image that was cultivated. Everyone, as Avi had pointed out, has a dark side. And that dark side, unfortunately, will create penalties for him that will be mostly financial.
Because the statute of limitations has run out on a lot of these
in terms of criminal penalties, he's not likely to suffer that. And because of age, his reputation, while that's tanked, he's not likely to mourn that for very long either. I do think, though, that part of what's going to happen in the long haul is that this will be a one-and-done kind of situation. We'll talk about the horrificness of some of his acts, and then we'll forget about it, and someone else who has prominence, they'll jump up and we'll target that person too. The truth of it is, in Hollywood especially, this is not uncommon. And most of it is hidden and not talked about or commonly accepted. We accepted it with 2 presidents. Think about it. Kennedy and Clinton in our own lifetime.
And Hoover and before our lifetime.
And before that, there were certainly more that will never be told because we simply didn't
zero in on that. I made a mistake. It's Harding, not Hoover. Hoover was an upright man. Harding was a womanizer.
Hoover was a clean jeans, but Harding, and then you can go back. I'm certain there were dalliances that occurred.
You didn't have the media that you have today,
right.
Scrutiny.
Right.
But, Cosby outed himself. I think one of you may have alluded to that.
Yeah, in his own words, it was in a deposition.
Saying, look, I bought Quaaludes for women I wanted presumably to have sex with. Right. But he was clever. He said he never admitted to actually giving the women to the women and doping them. So you can't really nail him.
Right. Right.
And the statute of limitations has run out. So,
And even that will only lead to women who have civil claims filed against him now having some credibility to their case because there was this prior admission that he at least possessed them and with the intent that perhaps he was going to use them. I feel badly because I do believe there was an awful lot of good that he did. He elevated the image of African Americans in the public consciousness, in the public awareness. The Cosby Show, it was the best image that we could hope for being portrayed of the African-American family on television. His cartoons, for which he got his EDD, his education doctorate, those two were very positive examples of young life and how you grow up and learn to become a good role player in your adult life. That's the piece that I'm sorriest about the most.
All right. Well, Governor Walker may have been looking for a smooth run-up to Monday's expected announcement that he's in the race for president, but it didn't quite turn out that way. And one particular addition to the budget bill caused controversy, backtracking, and some damage control. Rick Horowitz was watching it all, and he is not impressed. Rick.
A gang of robbers breaks into the First National Bank. Somebody outside notices the commotion and calls 911. Within minutes, the police surround the place and they tell the robbers to come out with their hands up. Then one of the robbers opens the door a crack and says, what if we just put the money back and we'll call it even? Not good enough. Not good enough at the bank. It's still attempted robbery. And not good enough at the state capitol. It's attempted robbery there, too. The folks running Wisconsin tried to rob you of your right to know what they're up to. They tried to eviscerate the state's open records law. Liberal groups were outraged, but so were conservative groups, so were good government groups. Finally, Scott Walker and his gang have united us. Naturally, they tried to wriggle out of it, out of their sneak attack on informed citizens and accountable government. We were trying to encourage deliberation, they claimed, prevent confusion. We wouldn't dream of keeping vital information from the public. It doesn't pass the laugh test or the smell test. A provision tucked into a giant budget bill at the last minute without hearings or debate and right before a long holiday weekend? This is something they were trying to hide, to protect other things they were trying to hide. Don't believe me? Just look at how hard it's been to get straight answers to 5 simple questions. Who suggested this new provision? Who approved that suggestion? Who drafted the thing? Who introduced it? And when did Governor Walker first know about it? We're still waiting for the answers. Where's that famous transparency the governor's always touting? On the other hand, why should we be surprised? This is Scott Walker we're talking about, the great prevaricator. He's made a career of this. When he isn't lying outright, he bobs and he weaves, he sidesteps and he obfuscates. The soothing words and then the sudden strike. He's practically Clintonian in his linguistic hair-splitting, and he's positively Nixonian in his political tactics. He plays dirty, always has, and he surrounds himself with people who play dirty too. Do you think that's just a coincidence? Nah. You don't break into the bank unless the gang leader wants you to break into the bank. Same with breaking into the law.
Get the whole narrative.
Well, thank you, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
They have emails.